330 acres of Atlanta, 12 soundstages, each one named after a black legend, a $43 million mansion that quietly sheltered a runaway prince and princess of England, a private island in the Bahamas, 2 jets, and a library of films and television he does not license, does not rent, but owns, every frame. Most people know the man in the dress. Almost no one is reporting the deed, because the real story here was never about a character, it was about a contract, and the single decision that turned an entertainer into a landlord of the entire machine. This is a channel about black wealth, black power, and black legacy across the world, the empires and the ownership that the mainstream rarely bothers to count. And we are not telling you the story you have already heard. We are telling you the one underneath it. So, before we go in, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is the side they leave out. The New Orleans Blueprint. He was born Emmitt Perry Jr. on September 13, 1969, in New Orleans, Louisiana. The childhood was not the kind that produces billionaires on paper. There was poverty. There was abuse so severe that at 16 he changed his own first name to Tyler, just to put distance between himself and his father. He dropped out of high school. He earned a GED, he worked odd jobs, and somewhere in there, he watched an episode of a talk show where the host mentioned that writing things down could be a form of healing. So he started writing, letters to himself at first, then something larger. In 1992, he took everything he had saved and staged a musical play he had written, called I Know I've Been Changed. The story was about adult survivors of child abuse. It was personal. It was raw, and on opening weekend, it played to an almost empty room. 30 people, in a theater built for hundreds. That is the moment most people would have quit. He did not quit. He took the play on the road, off and on, for 6 years, sometimes broke, sometimes sleeping in his car between cities. And here is where the thesis of this entire story begins, quietly, before anyone is watching. Because the lesson Tyler Perry was learning in those empty rooms was not about applause. Fame depreciates. The crowd forgets, but the thing you build, the thing you keep, the thing with your name on the deed, that compounds. By 1998, that same play sold out. It moved to the prestigious Fox Theater in Atlanta. Therefore, the man who had been performing to empty seats now had a problem most artists dream about: a growing audience, and a choice about what to do with the money it produced. The foundation years. Here is the part the highlight reels love: the conventional money, the big checks. In 2005, Perry took his stage following and financed his first feature film, Diary of a Mad Black Woman. He put up roughly $5.5 million of his own money. The studio, Lionsgate, matched it and handled distribution for a modest fee. The film opened at number 1. It out-earned its budget many times over in its first weekend alone. Then came the franchise. Madea, the pistol-toting, truth-telling grandmother who became one of the most reliable box office draws of her entire era. Madea's Family Reunion, which opened to more than $30 million. Madea Goes to Jail, which debuted to more than $41 million. At the time, the biggest opening of his career and the best in his studio partner's history. Madea Halloween. And eventually, a Madea Family Funeral in 2019, billed as the final chapter, which still opened to around $27 million more than a decade into the run. Sit with that consistency for a moment, because consistency is the asset here, not any single hit. Almost every Madea film crossed $50 million. The franchise marched toward $500 million in total, and critics, for the most part, never came along for the ride. Perry was never building for the reviews. He was building for the audience that showed up every single time. The audience Hollywood kept telling him did not exist. Across 21 films with Lionsgate, Perry's movies generated more than $1 billion in ticket sales. He even leaned into a straight-to-home video strategy on some titles, capturing revenue other filmmakers were too proud to chase. $1 billion in tickets. That is the number a normal documentary stops on. The triumphant rags to riches close. But watch carefully. Because this is the trap that catches almost every famous person who ever lived. They earn the income, they enjoy the income, and the income is all they ever build. The check is the ceiling. For Tyler Perry, all of this, the billion in tickets, the franchise, the fame, was never the structure. It was only the foundation. And he was about to pour something far heavier on top of it. The pivot to ownership. The turn came from a conversation. Perry has told the story many times. He looked at the people in entertainment who had real, durable wealth, and the pattern was always the same. They did not just star in the show, they owned the show. Oprah Winfrey owned The Oprah Winfrey Show and her production company, Harpo. She did not work for the machine. She was the machine. And the advice that reportedly passed between them was simple and ruthless. Own everything. So Perry made a decision that, even today, most of Hollywood refuses to make. Instead of selling his shows for the biggest possible upfront check and walking away, he built his own soundstages in Atlanta. He wrote, he directed, he produced, and critically, he kept the rights. When his series House of Pain took off, the value of that decision became impossible to ignore. The show was eventually sold in a package reported at around $200 million, and because Perry owned it outright, the lion's share flowed to him rather than to a studio he was renting from. He put it to Forbes in a single line that explains the entire empire. He said, and I am paraphrasing the spirit of it, "I own the lights, I own the sets. That is where the difference is." Think about what that actually means. Every other producer in town rents the stage, rents the equipment, splits the back end, and surrenders the copyright. Perry pays himself for the stage, pays himself for the lights, and keeps the copyright forever. The same hour of work that makes another creator a salary makes Tyler Perry an asset. This is the heart of the whole story. Not how much he earned, how much he kept and turned into something he owned. The Atlanta compound. Which brings us to the deed that anchors everything. In 2015, Perry bought the former Fort McPherson Army base on the south side of Atlanta. The price has been widely reported at around $30 million, 330 acres. And sit with the history of that ground for a second, because it matters. Fort McPherson was a military base whose roots reach back to the Confederate-era, ground once tied to an army that fought to keep black people enslaved. And now the deed to that land carries one name, his. He opened Tyler Perry Studios at that location in 2019, becoming the first Black American to own a major film studio outright. Not a stake, not a lease, outright. The scale is genuinely hard to picture. 12 soundstages, ranging from 10,000 to 38,000 square feet each, and he named them, deliberately, after the giants who came before him. The Cicely Tyson stage, the Sidney Poitier stage, Harry Belafonte, Oprah Winfrey, Will Smith, Halle Berry, Denzel Washington, Spike Lee, Ruby Dee, Ossie Davis, Diahann Carroll, Whoopi Goldberg. Every time a production rolls onto a stage, it rolls under a black legend's name. The lot holds permanent sets that other productions pay to use, a replica of the White House, convincing enough that political dramas film their Oval Office scenes there, an airport terminal, a scale neighborhood with real streets, hundreds of thousands of square feet of office space. Productions like Black Panther and The Walking Dead have shot on his ground, which means even the biggest names in entertainment have, at some point, written a check that landed in Tyler Perry's account just for the privilege of standing on his property. And now the title promise, stated precisely, because precision is the point. The Burbank studio, lots of Walt Disney, Warner Brothers, and Paramount, when you add all three together, come to roughly 226 acres. Tyler Perry's single Atlanta lot is 330, one man, one deed, larger than the 3 Burbank lots of the biggest names in film, combined. We will come back to exactly what that means. The holdings beyond the lot. The studio is the crown. It is not the whole portfolio. There is the residential real estate, and one home in particular carries a story. His estate in Beverly Hills, an 8-bedroom, 12-bathroom property reported at around $43 million, became internationally famous for a reason almost no one expected. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle left the British royal family and needed somewhere to disappear, it was Tyler Perry's house they quietly stayed in. A man who once slept in his car now owns the address where royalty hides. Beyond Beverly Hills, Forbes has reported homes in Atlanta, in New York, and a log cabin in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, the kind of zip code where billionaires keep their quiet money. There is a private island in the Bahamas, and there are 2 private jets. Forbes has bundled the planes and the homes into a category it calls, plainly, homes and toys, valued at roughly $40 million. But notice the discipline even here. For a man of his reported wealth, the toys are almost restrained. The real money was never poured into things that lose value the moment you touch them. It was poured into things that produce, and that is the layer most people never see at all. The machine he owns. If you are getting value from this breakdown, take 1 second and subscribe, because this next layer is the one that actually separates rich from wealthy. Now, the engine room. Tyler Perry does not just own buildings. He owns the catalog. By Forbes' accounting, he owns the entirety of his creative output, more than 1,200 episodes of television, over 20 feature films, roughly 24 stage plays. That library does not sit on a shelf. It works. It streams, it licenses, it sells, again and again, and the revenue runs back to one owner. Consider just one piece of it. House of Pain became one of the longest-running, most heavily syndicated black sitcoms in American television, the kind of show that airs somewhere on some channel almost every single day. For most creators, a hit like that is a paycheck that ends when the network's contract ends. For Perry, who owns it, every rerun, every syndication window, every streaming refresh is a payment back to him, decades after the cameras stopped. He is paid for work he finished years ago because the rights never left his hands. That is the quiet superpower of ownership. The labor happens once, the income repeats forever. On top of the catalog sits the deal structure. Perry negotiated a content arrangement with the company, now known as Paramount, reported at around $150 million a year to create new programming. And here is the part that should make every creator sit up. He gets paid to produce content, and he keeps owning much of what he produces. He is being financed to grow his own asset base. He also took equity in the distribution itself. When BET Plus, the streaming service, launched, Perry secured a reported 25% stake. So he does not merely make shows for a platform. He owns a quarter of the shelf they sit on. He owns the content, he owns the studio the content is filmed in, and he owns a piece of the pipe that delivers it to your screen. That is what owning the machine actually looks like, top to bottom. It is why analysts estimate he personally pulls in somewhere between $200 million and $250 million in a typical year. Not from a salary, from a structure. The name as a business. Then there is the brand, the part built directly around his own name, because Tyler Perry, the businessman, and Tyler Perry, the product, are the same asset. Tyler Perry Studios is not only where he shoots, it is a working production facility that other companies rent. When a major film or series wants soundstage space in Atlanta, one of the most production-friendly cities in America thanks to Georgia's tax incentives, Perry's lot is a phone call they make. The landlord gets paid whether or not his own cameras are rolling. His production company turns out content at a pace that is, frankly, unusual in the industry. Series, films, and stage productions, written and directed and produced under his control, feeding the catalog, feeding the studio, feeding the deals. Every piece reinforces every other piece. The plays built the film audience, the films justified the studio enabled the deals fund more content. It is a closed loop, and he owns every point on the circle. This is the difference between a celebrity with a fortune and an owner with a system. A celebrity earns until the public moves on. A system keeps producing long after the spotlight drifts. Therefore, the question was never whether Tyler Perry would stay famous. The question is whether the machine he built needs him to be famous at all. And increasingly, it does not. The legacy lever. Here is where most documentaries file the philanthropy under charity. We are going to file it where it belongs. Under architecture, Perry's giving is real and it is large. Through the Tyler Perry Foundation and on his own, he has paid the grocery bills for senior citizens at dozens of stores at once. He left a $21,000 tip for restaurant workers struggling during the pandemic. He stepped in to financially support the survivors of one of the most harrowing abuse cases in recent American memory. He has quietly funded reward offers, jobs, and rescues that never made the news. But look at the structure of it. He has spoken about building, somewhere on those 330 acres, a compound to house and train trafficked women, homeless women, and displaced young people, teaching them the business so they can re-enter society self-sufficient. Housing, daycare, skills, on land he owns, inside a system he controls. That is not a check written and forgotten. That is using the asset base itself as a multiplier. The same land that films the movies trains the next generation. The same name that sells the tickets opens the doors. Legacy, built into the real estate. This is what it looks like when generosity is engineered with the same discipline as a balance sheet. The life now. So where does that leave him today? Tyler Perry is in his mid-50s, and by most accounts he splits his time between Atlanta, where the empire physically sits, and his other holdings. He has a son, Aman, from his long relationship with the model and humanitarian Galila Bekele. He remains, by every report, intensely private about the personal life and intensely public about the work. He still writes, he still directs, he still produces at a volume that would exhaust a full department at a traditional studio, and he does it on his own land, with his own equipment, keeping his own rights. The man who once could not fill 30 seats now decides what gets made on 330 acres. Forbes has placed his net worth near $1.4 billion, which by their math makes him the wealthiest actor on the planet. Other trackers, like Celebrity Net Worth, argue the true figure is more conservative, closer to $850 million. The honest answer is that the precise number is disputed, and it almost does not matter. Because whether it is $850 million or $1.4 billion, it sits on the same foundation: ownership, the synthesis. So let us go back to where we started. 330 acres, 12 sound stages, the $43 million mansion that hid a prince and princess, the private island, the catalog of films and television he owns outright. Every one of those is now explainable by a single idea. Tyler Perry studied what fame gives you, and he noticed it gives you a moment, not a foundation. So he took the moment, the Madea money, the billion in tickets, the talk show advice, and he converted it, deliberately, into things with deeds and copyrights and equity stakes attached. Now, cash the promise in the title precisely. Yes, he owns a studio larger than Disney. Stated correctly, his single Atlanta lot is bigger than the Burbank studio, lots of Disney, Warner Brothers, and Paramount combined. But understand what that headline really measures. It is not about square footage. It is about who holds the deed. Disney's lot is owned by shareholders and a board. Warner's lot is owned by a conglomerate. Tyler Perry's lot is owned by Tyler Perry. So when we say he owns a studio bigger than Disney, what we are really saying is this: he owns the access. He owns the capital. He owns the land that the industry that once ignored him now has to rent. He did not get a seat at the table. He bought the building the table is in. Fame would have given him a great career. Ownership gave him a kingdom. Fame depreciates. Ownership compounds. And the deed has his name on it. I want to hear from you on this one, so drop it in the comments. Which of these moves was the smartest? Owning the studio land outright, keeping 100% of the catalog, taking the 25% equity stake in the streaming platform, or building the philanthropy directly into the real estate? Tell me which one you would have made first. And if stories like this matter to you, the second acts, the quiet ownership, the empires the mainstream forgets to count, then subscribe and turn on notifications. Next week, we are opening the books on another untold black wealth story most outlets will never tell correctly. You do not want to miss who owns what.